Psychologists of Reddit, what's one thing a patient has told you that caught you off guard, or vice versa, patient's perspective? My therapist once abruptly ended our session after telling me I needed to go to the ER. I had been in a car accident the day before and had an undiagnosed concussion that was pretty bad. I was so out of it I didn't even realize I was out of it. He later told me I was talking about inappropriate topics. I was so embarrassed I didn't ask what I specifically talked about, so he didn't want to know at that point, and wasn't making much sense. I'm just glad he recognized I was off that day and helped me get to the hospital. Man. Concussions are hell. I've had a few. I've got one sister-in-law who hasn't spoken to me since I was chatting with her via Skype chat while recouping in the hospital. I don't even remember WTF I said. Told mine I had seen him grabbing a drink at the same place I used to go get drunk before COVID. He stared at me like I had discovered something NASA was hiding. We had a laugh and he confessed it. Context: I had huge drinking problems and he told me he didn't like to drink at all. I paid and sat through an entire session of therapy during which my therapist ranted as to how great of a career he could have had as a stand-up comedian and how much he regrets his current profession. I kinda agreed with him near the end. During my first and only session with a particularly memorable child psychologist, he referred to me as a miserable bitch. It was true. But he didn't have to call me out like that. I'm a clinical psychologist working on the back end of my postdoc. I work predominantly with acute adolescent presentations such as chronic self-injury or sexual trauma. I'm so used to the young people I help hating themselves. It hurts a lot inside. But I firmly believe in catharsis through positive regard and validation. So as we do our therapy, I often sprinkle in comments here and there about some of the things about them that I admire, respect, or appreciate. Things like their perseverance, their kindness, or their passion for an interest of theirs. I'm always so caught off guard when they agree with me or say something nice about themselves that it's really the only time I find myself slightly tearful in session. I'm always so damn proud of them and it hurts to hear the depths of their self-hatred. Those little moments of growth make me feel like it's the first warm day after winter. When I was in high school I was hospitalized for being suicidal. My doctor there told me some really brilliant advice that totally cleared things up for me. Basically just fixing me on the spot. You just have to be a normal boy. Lol. I'm really messed up. Been hospitalized a lot. I go through moments of such intense delusions that I'm no longer myself. I was admitted once after trying to get my veins out of my arm, thinking they were wires. The doctor that was assigned to me wasn't really expecting me to be so paranoid. While in the observation room, he was trying to talk to me and I blurted, "What's it like being a robot?" "MR. Robot man?" I said, "Man, kind of like Moana," and he started laughing. He wasn't expecting it. I wasn't either. I laughed with him. He was such a nice East Indian man. And hearing anyone with the same accent makes me feel lighter somehow. I had one tell me I needed to learn to bite the bullet, which turned out to be good advice, even if it was blunt. Edit. I wasn't there because I was suicidal or anything. I was there because my mom and I had a pretty volatile relationship. She had some emotional issues where she'd just lash out at me over things that didn't make sense. And if I needed to learn to stick it out until she got better, which she eventually did, and we have a much better relationship, really paid off. When I was in first or second grade, the school counselor fell asleep when I was describing a bullying situation that I was in. I was so young that I didn't know how to respond. So I just sat there in his office until he woke up. I had a therapist tell me when I was a teenager that she didn't know what else to do to help me because it seemed like I already understood everything pretty well. This was after my overbearing and crazy helicopter mom dragged me in for being depressed. Then she switched to therapy eyeing my mom, and my mom quickly was in tears because she has the emotional strength of a child and wanted it to be about me when it was actually all about her. I knew exactly why I was depressed. I was stuck by myself in the middle of nowhere with her crazy ass. No personal space. No ability to get away. Not being able to say no. Her getting jealous of my friends when I spend time with them. It would make anyone depressed. She didn't even let me sit with the therapist by myself. Patient here. In response to me telling my therapist that I was prescribed Wellbutrin for my depression anxiety, my therapist stated that it was a medication that a lot of adults with ADD see a positive effect with. It threw me off for a second and I was like, that's cool. Why do you say that? Double quote. Therapist. Dot. Because you have ADD? Double quote. Me. What? I do? Double quote. Therapist. Yes. You present very typical ADD for adults. Double quote. Me. Dot. Double quote. Therapist. I thought you knew already. Double quote. Me. Nope. But that explained so much. Double quote. I also got a second opinion just in case and it turns out I absolutely am ADD. Thanks doc. Lol. Was talking to my school counselor about some mental health issues and told him that I like playing card games to take my mind off of it. The man literally opens his cabinet and pulls out a briefcase full of Yu-Gi-Oh cards. I'm a massive nerd. And says Suohu. Wanna play? Don't get me wrong, but this guy had a lumberjack beard. Was fit and looked more like an athlete than a counselor, so I was shocked. Got over my problems and played every Wednesday against him. Edit. THX for my first award, kind stranger. My therapist and I would end every appointment with a discussion of the latest Game of Thrones while it was airing. A great way to end things. Even the shitty end of the show got plenty of light-hearted ribbing. It was great BC, it wasn't too personal, and after talking about sex abuse for an hour I could leave without being such a sad sack. Dude, that's awesome. I want your therapist. Even though I don't need one. After 5 or 6 sessions I was about to schedule my next appointment when my therapist said she wouldn't continue seeing me because she should spend her time on patients who have real problems. I didn't see another therapist again for, like, 15 years. First time I saw the counselor. He was looking over my paperwork and said he could tell from my handwriting the I was good in bed. I kid you not. I was so caught off guard, all I could say was up. I think I am. So young and not assertive at all. Found out he got in trouble for an inappropriate relationship with a client. But it really screwed me up for a bit, him saying that because I have problems setting boundaries with men. That counselor is a predator. He took advantage of being in a position of power over a vulnerable person. I hope you've found ways to build healthy boundaries. When my psychologist told me as a 16-year-old that I will never recover and that I should prepare for a struggling life. My therapist has teared up in sessions with me. My therapist cried at the end of a session once. While crying, she said, "God, you are in so much pain." The next session she profusely apologized for being unprofessional and we moved on. Looking back, I really wish I had the words at the time to tell her how much that meant to me. She was the first person who really validated the pain I was in and made me feel like I was someone worth crying for. I was hospitalized a bit ago for trying to kill myself. When you do that in certain places they can put a mandatory hold on you. I was held for 8 days at a psychiatric unit. It was maybe the most helpful mental health assistance I've ever gotten. I had very insightful, intelligent doctors and counselors. At the end, on my last day as I was leaving, a nurse walked me out of the secure portion of the facility and into a hallway. In the hallway all of my doctors and counselors had lined up to say goodbye on either side of the hall. As I walked down, my most favorite counselor started singing "Oh Holy Night" for some reason and IDKY, but I really loved it. Those doctors and counselors were so relatable and down to earth, and I felt so awful when I got there and I was so much better when I left. My physiologist, this was when I was 9, went up to my mother in front of 10 people and told her I was F-ed and there was nothing he could do, so she might as well kill me. He said this in front of me, my sister, my only friend, who then moved, my grandmother, my grandfather, and 6 strangers. I was, and still am, In therapy for watching my uncle die right in front of me, heart attack, my suicidal depression, schizophrenia, and anxiety disorder. I think I am fricked. Not gonna lie. I've noticed a trend of messed up therapists here. I'm sorry you had to hear that. I would bet it's not true. That man should not be employed. At the beginning of the session we introduced ourselves and then I proceeded to talk about my increasingly difficult battle with depression. I got a little emotional, but after almost 3/4 of an hour he asked me if I remembered his name. For the life of me I couldn't, and it just totally baffled me, as I almost pride myself in being polite and remembering things like that. Med student here who has seen some patients in psychiatry. Things admitted to me by patients. A bleach drinking addiction. Murder. Many details of many suicide attempts. Many conspiracies about the world. How we're about to be nuked. Plans to murder people. Often high up government officials or once my classmates. Every time a complex patient opens up about their past, it was always childhood abuse. And no matter how many times I hear it, I'm never ready. I had been suicidal every day for over a year. When I was 14/15 I started seeing my first therapist. After a few sessions she told me I was too happy to be in therapy and kicked me out. And it messed me up a lot, lol. I've been told almost that same thing. I suffer from severe social anxiety, but get me one-on-one. I compensate by being too eager and talkative. They always tell me I'm too upbeat for anxiety and depression. On the bright side, I did finally end up with a good one. My psychologist's jaw dropped to the floor when I explained why a good percentage of my body was always covered in scars or bandages. It was from a mix of self-harm and from other miscellaneous things having caused a lot of harm to me. He ended up writing it all down and it totaled to a 2-page list. The majority of it was things like broken ribs from having an aluminium canoe thrown at me when I was 4 and having been stabbed repeatedly with a Bowie knife. This caught him off guard because I apparently always seemed unnervingly calm to him and didn't outwardly show any signs of significant childhood injuries, and due to one of my hobbies being boxing. The moment when the psych looks at you and is trying to figure out if you are lying or not. I'm like, please, we haven't even got to college yet, let's wait for the really messed up shit to happen. The session was very blunt and it was question after question. I was eventually asked about drugs and I hesitated and squeaked. No. Double quote. The stiff and serious atmosphere cracked at that moment as we both began to giggle. The woman had a serious face up until that point. One of the more interesting sessions I've had with my therapist was getting into a tangential argument about philosophy. I don't mean clinically relevant philosophical questions like why should I keep on living. I mean we started bickering over our interpretations of Street, Augustine of Hippo or something. I can't remember who we actually started arguing about off the top of my head. But it was pretty funny in retrospect. Close bracket. I quite like her and I'm still seeing her today. She said, "You don't have to forgive someone. Especially when they were so cruel and are not sorry." Shocked the hell out of me, as any therapist before that tried to get me to forgive. But I can't. I live with it and I don't think forgiving them would bring me any kind of peace. There's a difference between forgiving and moving on. You can't deny what the person did or how it affected you, but you can change how you react in the future to the trigger. There's people I will never forgive in my life. That I refuse to see or even talk about. But that doesn't mean I haven't been able to move on with my life through therapy. I feel a sick sense of camaraderie seeing how many child psychologists f'd up other redditors. Jeez. I was 9 or 10. My father left us and my mother tried to commit suicide shortly after. In a session I spoke about being sad my dad left us. Then I was asked, what did it feel like to know your mom tried to leave you forever? I had never framed her suicide attempt that way. I thought she was sick and needed to get better. That session really traumatized me and set me up for years of abandonment issues. Some people should not be allowed around children. I had a religious therapist once tell me I just needed more water to solve my depression. She concluded this by having me hold out my arms, and she tested the strength of each one by pushing down on it, and I had to resist against it. Like, really? Looking back, I should have told her it was BS, but I was so caught off guard I was just like, well, okay, I'll have some more water. My most recent therapist experience lasted for 2 sessions only. Both times. Every time I'd discuss an issue I was having, my therapist would say, "OMG, me too." Double quote. Like, "I'm here for you, help me. If you're just gonna say that, I can have this conversation on my own." The last session, the therapist said, "If we met outside of this scenario, we'd be really good friends." Double quote. That was it for me. Already wrote about this in a different thread. But when the marriage counselor told my then husband and I that we were too hard to work with and she couldn't see us anymore, she fired us from her practice. She didn't make us a referral to someone else either. Similar. When the marriage counselor asked to speak with me alone to warn me that my then husband had displayed so many worrying signs of narcissism and character disorder during the one session that she worried for me and my infant daughter, the counselor agreed to see me a few more times but refused to see the husband. "There's nothing I can do for you. Your problems are untreatable." Double quote. I was 11. The honesty is now appreciated. But at the time it was so traumatic that I repressed the memory of hearing that and acted out so horribly that Toronto healthcare people have seen me as the enemy ever since then. The only thing that caught me off guard was when my client, after 3 weeks of acting more aloof than anyone I've ever met, admitted that he was only in therapy to get his mom off his back for having a hard time getting to sleep, which he thought meant severe anxiety. I spent the time in between speaking to my supervisor on how to touch on possible severe trauma. I felt like an idiot, but he kept coming back, so I imagine I was useful in some way. Went to a psychologist when I was probably 13. I had depression, anxiety, and an eating disorder, and they often manifested in bad panic attacks and anger. After seeing him a few times and telling him everything, he brought my parents into the room and proceeded to tell them that I was fine. I was just angry at my parents and seeking attention. I tried protesting and explaining myself, but he refused to listen and tried arguing with me. Needless to say, I never went back there, and my parents took me to a new psychologist. It definitely kept me up a lot. And even thinking about it makes me angry. I was taking my teenage daughter, who was struggling with an eating disorder, to a therapist who specialized in that. Even though she was old enough to drive herself, I always took her and waited in the waiting room. Just to be supportive for her. To be honest, I didn't think the sessions were helping all that much. But I was at my wit's end trying to help my girl. I knew enough was enough though. When, after missing a few sessions due to other commitments, my daughter showed up to her appointment and the therapist greeted her with, "Wow, you look like you've lost some weight," in an approving tone. What the hell? We never went back. I was making some light-hearted comments after the appointment with my psychologist about how people in my little town don't believe in the coronavirus. And he said, "Well, I think China spread it on purpose, so I may be a little crazy too." UHH. Edit. He didn't say China was negligent and allowed it to spread, which I think most people don't think is too far-fetched. He said they did it on purpose, like engineered it and caused the spread purposefully. I honestly believe that you can always recover no matter how bad your situation is. A psychologist of all people shouldn't be telling you that you're fucked. I don't want to doubt people's stories, but I have often seen vivid misrepresentations of what goes on at sessions. This doesn't mean people are lying, and it doesn't mean that bad therapists and counselors aren't out there in considerable numbers. One is too high, but it is still a relationship that can be highly complex, and interactions that can draw out a high degree of defensiveness, anger, or other problem coping styles. Again, the point of this is not to disparage anyone, but to encourage everyone to seek out help if they need it, and learn about what sort of therapy you are getting. I just described how I tried to kill myself when I was 8. My therapist was crying and had to stop the session. I once took a client, boy, age 8, to community park and went over the rules of the park. Obviously rules of no running identified, but then they added no pushing. Especially girls heads over and over until they're flat dead. Double quote. We left the park to discuss a few things along the lake instead. My therapist told me it must be nice to just be able to come here and not have any actual problems. I'm just someone for you to talk to. Like actually sir, I have lots of problems. I was the patient in this situation. She called my parents to have a small chat with them. Nothing harmless really. Just to get to know them because of my complaints, and both my parents were there. Next time I saw her she casually said, "You have your father's humor." And I replied something along the lines of "Thanks. It's the trauma," and she laughed. She laughed. She found it actually funny and didn't shame me. It's not really interesting, but I have anxiety and thought she'd shame me for my coping mechanism. Such a sweet lady. My wife is an LPC. She works with severe mentally ill patients. Most with dual diagnosis. These are people that will most likely never get better or be productive members of society. I feel like she's an awesome and strong therapist. Many professionals in the field have told me the same. Working with these types of people can have moments that would catch many people off guard. But she's a hoss. She asked one of her patients why he didn't want to eat lunch with the other peers. It's how they refer to patients because it is more humanizing. She said this was one of the craziest patients she's ever had. And that he doesn't live in this reality 5 hours of every day. In a moment of clarity he told her his reason for not wanting to eat with his peers. I don't know if you know this, but those people in there are crazy. She said it was the one time she's ever inappropriately laughed in her professional career. Bummer. I was really hoping this question got a lot of attention. Yeah, unfortunately it has to get a lot of upvotes for an actual psychologist to see it. As a psychologist in a prison many times, you can read past comments. One that always sticks out was a patient I really liked who always talked about her ex-husband in favorable terms. One day out of the blue she told me that she burned him on the leg with an iron many times and then would send photos to his family. She thought they were being mean to her. I was so surprised. She then outlined a lot of deep dark thoughts she never disclosed before. I had a client who was schizophrenic tell me he had the cure for MS. He told me that if you fed a seahorse cornflakes it would emit a serum that would cure it. IJS that I bet no one has tried it, so I couldn't contest it. Nasarosa. From a patient's perspective, I had explained to my psychologist how I felt really bad about not wanting to go out on another date with this guy. Felt really bad. Guilty. Everything. He looked at me and said, "Well, why don't you f***ing marry him?" I just sat open-eyed and then laughed. And said, "Wow. You're right." And never thought about that again. So now, whenever I feel bad about something inconsequential or little, I think back to his words, haha. My psychologist was amazing though, and I always valued his bluntness as that was usually the best way to get through to me. This kind of fits. Caught my therapist watching porn off the reflection of his glasses during a Skype session 2 months ago. I am no longer seeing him. I wasn't sure it was porn, but when confronted he fessed up to it being porn. My doctor told me to get a boyfriend to help with my depression. That definitely caught me off guard. My mom got family counseling with me, her son, and her, and after she had her 10 minutes alone with the counselor she called me in for my 10 and she told me something I'll never forget. "Yeah, just go live with your dad. Parents were divorced, and so I did, and I haven't had a problem since." I was 27 before it was brought to my attention that I have debilitating self-loathing and I don't like myself. Legit. I was totally blind to it. Psychiatrist here was having a totally normal conversation with a 12-year-old patient until the topic of homicidal ideations turned up. She lowered her head to the ground, flipped her hair to cover her face, and started talking in a high-pitched baby voice about how she constantly wants to kill her parents and classmates, and detailed how she would. It was unnerving. Borderline personality disorder can be intense. I confessed to my therapist that I had developed a crush on him and had sexual thoughts about him. He looked pretty caught off guard. He was super professional and we worked through it in a productive way. Sometimes I did some stuff to women. Like with sex. I know they didn't want it. I can be aggressive. Double quote. This would not have been terrible in session. But this was as a grad student and was said to me once we left the therapy room. In the hallway and in a hushed voice. I sincerely was so caught off guard that I didn't know how to respond in the moment. Ah yes. My therapist. I'm a former K9 unit police officer. And I had to see a therapist after my last day serving. Because of an incident where I got shot in the stomach and watched my assigned K9 brick get shot and killed. My therapist. No shit. When I told her about my dog. Said maybe I should get a cat. No. Shit. I think psychologists are not legally allowed to answer this question. No they are. They can't reveal the identity of the patient though. I went to a psychologist for the first time when I turned 22 because of my social anxiety. And he uncovered all my past issues and my PTSD. And my depression from abuse, physical and sexual. Watching my friend kill herself. My twin dying. And all that had happened to me and he cried. It actually helped me to see what was so wrong with my situation that someone whose job is to listen to this shit ended up crying. Had a therapist repeatedly ask me if my stepdad was being sexual or if I thought of him in a sexual way and would not let it go. All because I said once that we didn't really get along. I was 13. He had just started dating my mom. So I wasn't his biggest fan. It was effing weird. I finally had to tell her no. And stop asking me that. It's creepy. She got super defensive. I found a different therapist. I work in an inpatient psych hospital. Some of the women took to swallowing objects as self-harm. One of them casually mentioned she used to swallow knives. Which she followed up with Walmart sells knives for 88 cents. It was great when I was broke. My therapist knows I'm pagan. And she offered, and actually followed through. On bringing in a tarot deck to do a therapy session. She always asks me about my wife, I'm a lesbian, and compliments me on my progress on whatever we're working on. I've been in therapy for almost 10 years and she's been the best I've ever had. She was in grad school when I started with her and is the reason I'm pursuing social work. Close bracket. Psych once told me to imagine what people would say at my funeral. I suffer from depression and suicidal ideation. I have no idea why this lady asked me this. But she asked my gender and orientation. I picked my jaw up off the floor. And told her the truth. She was chill as hell. Good lady. My doctor told teenage me that he worked in a junkyard and I was just another piece of junk for him to put together. His words stuck with me and hurt for a long time.